Welcome to Momentum Mind, the place where your mindset meets action, and every idea can turn into momentum. Here, we dive deep into self-growth, mindset secrets, and life-changing books, breaking them down so you can fully imagine, feel, and apply their lessons. Are you ready to unlock the power of your mind and take control of your journey? Let's get started. Chapter 1: The Shepherd and the Whispering Road. The boy slept beneath a wide, patient sky, his cloak spread on the ground like a promise he had made to himself long ago. Above him, stars watched in silence, and below him, the earth breathed with the slow comfort of familiar soil. Near his side, his flock rested in a loose circle, their soft sounds weaving together into a living blanket of calm. He liked sleeping this way, with the open world as his roof, because it made him feel as though nothing stood between him and whatever might be waiting beyond the horizon. That he was a shepherd, not because he had been born into it, but because he had chosen it. Long ago, he had traded heavy books and narrow rooms for roads that bent and twisted like thoughts still forming. He had learned the moods of wind and grass, the way the sun could be kind or cruel, and how animals understood things people often forgot. Walking with the flock from place to place, he felt closer to something true, something that spoke without words. That night, a dream returned to him like a persistent visitor who refused to be ignored. He dreamed of a wide field and a tall tree rising from it. Beneath the tree, a child appeared, laughing, eyes bright with secrets. The child took the boy by the hands and spun him until the world blurred, then pointed far away, beyond hills and towns, beyond the edge of knowing. Just as the boy tried to see what was being shown, he woke with his heart racing, the image dissolving like mist in sunlight. That he sat up, annoyed and curious at once. This dream had come before, always ending at the same moment, always leaving him with the same restless feeling. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the flock, checking that all was well. Everything was as it should be, yet something inside him felt slightly off, like a door left ajar. As dawn softened the sky, he gathered the flock and began walking toward a nearby town, a place of white walls and narrow streets where he sometimes traded wool and heard bits of news. He knew this town well. A girl lived there who sold sweets and smiled as if she carried a private light. He told himself he visited for business, but his heart told a different story. The road greeted him like an old friend. Stones remembered his footsteps, and olive trees leaned close as if listening. As he walked, his thoughts returned to the dream. He wondered if it was only the mind playing tricks, stirred by travel and loneliness. Still, the image of the child pointing outward tugged at him, gentle but firm. In the town, the air smelled of bread and dust. Voices echoed off the walls, and life moved in familiar patterns. He tended to his work, spoke with traders, and lingered where the girl might pass. When she did, her laughter lifted something in him, yet even then the dream hovered at the edge of his thoughts, refusing to fade. Later, feeling unsettled, he decided to visit a woman known for reading dreams. Her home was cool and shadowed, filled with the scent of herbs. She listened as he spoke, her eyes sharp and unreadable. When he finished, she told him the dream was simple and dangerous. It spoke of a treasure waiting in a distant land, near great sands and silent stones. She asked for a promise of payment if the treasure was found, and though her words stirred fear, they also sparked a strange excitement. He left her house with his mind buzzing. Treasure. The word felt heavy, unreal. He laughed at himself as he walked back into the sun. Shepherds did not find treasures. They found grass, water, and shelter. Yet the dream would not let him go, and the woman's certainty clung to him like burrs. Seeking comfort, he sat in the town square, watching people pass. An old man approached him, eyes bright, posture calm, as if he carried no weight at all. They spoke of small things at first, the weather, the flock, the road. Then the old man said something that made the boy's breath catch. He spoke of the dream. Not as a guess, but as if he already knew it. The boy felt exposed, as though the world had quietly read his thoughts aloud. The old man spoke of listening to one's heart, of paths meant for each person alone. His voice was gentle, but his words cut deep, opening places the boy had kept closed. He spoke of a great purpose that calls softly at first, then louder, until it can no longer be ignored. As the sun dipped lower, the square seemed to hold its breath. The old man's eyes shone with a knowing light, and he smiled as if standing at the edge of a game only he understood. The boy felt a pull toward something vast and unknown, a road stretching far beyond sheep and towns and familiar smiles. And as the old man leaned closer, about to reveal more, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the promise of a journey that could change everything. Chapter 2: The Whispering King. Morning spread across the port city like a spilled bowl of light. The sea breathed slowly, lifting the smell of salt and tar, and gulls cried as if arguing over secrets only they understood. The shepherd woke on stone still warm from yesterday's sun, his cloak pulled tight around him. For a moment he did not know where he was, and then the dream returned, pressing against his thoughts like a door that refused to stay closed. He rose and shook sleep from his bones. Merchants were already shouting, their voices weaving together into a restless song. Copper bells rang as shops opened their mouths. Somewhere nearby, bread cracked as it was torn apart, releasing steam and hunger into the air. The boy watched it all, feeling small and strangely awake, as if the world had leaned closer to listen to him. He carried his bag toward the square where travelers crossed paths and destinies brushed without noticing. It was there that he saw the old man. The stranger sat alone on a bench worn smooth by waiting. His beard was white as desert salt, his skin dark and folded like old parchment. His clothes were simple, but his eyes were sharp, bright pools that seemed to hold the sky. When the shepherd passed, the man looked up and smiled as though greeting a long-lost friend. "What is it you are reading?" the old man asked, his voice gentle, almost playful. The shepherd hesitated, then answered. He sat, keeping his bag close. The man leaned in, peering at the pages, and shook his head with a soft laugh. He spoke of stories that trapped people in sadness, of words that forgot the joy of the road. The shepherd felt a sting of offense, then curiosity. Few strangers spoke so freely, as if the world belonged to them. They talked about sheep and wandering, about kings and wars that rose and fell like tides. The old man listened with a hunger that felt deeper than interest. He asked the shepherd about his life, about why he chose dust and stars over walls and doors. The shepherd spoke of freedom, of knowing the land by the taste of its wind. He spoke of the dream, though he did not know why he trusted this stranger with it. When the dream was done, the old man grew quiet. He traced a shape in the air, as if writing on an invisible page. He spoke of a path each person carries inside, a story written before the body learns to walk. He called it a personal calling, a promise whispered by the world at birth. The shepherd felt the words settle into him like seeds. The old man asked for the boy's pouch. Confused, the shepherd handed it over. The man opened it, counting without counting, smiling to himself. He returned it and asked for something in exchange for his wisdom. The shepherd offered bread, then money, then silence. The old man shook his head. "Your sheep," he said, as if naming a simple thing. The shepherd laughed, thinking it a joke. Then he saw the man's eyes. They were steady, waiting. A tremor ran through him. His sheep were his life, his moving home. To give them away was to cut the rope that tied him to everything he knew. The old man reached into his pocket and drew out 2 stones, smooth and warm. One was dark as night after rain. The other pale as moonlit sand. He placed them in the shepherd's palm. "These speak," the man said. "When the world confuses you, they answer with simple truth. Light means yes. Dark means no." The stones seemed heavier than stone. The shepherd closed his fingers around them, feeling a pulse that might have been his own blood. The old man rose. He straightened like a banner lifted by wind, suddenly taller, broader, crowned by an unseen weight. He spoke of deserts and omens, of listening to signs written in the flight of birds and the tilt of chance. He spoke of a treasure waiting where earth met sky, where beginnings remembered their ends. Then he was gone. The bench stood empty. The square roared on. The shepherd searched the crowd, his heart pounding, but the old man had folded himself into the day and disappeared. In the shepherd's hand, the stones lay silent, patient that he spent the day walking without aim, the city sliding past him. At the edge of the harbor, he watched ships prepare to leave. Ropes creaked. Sails flapped like restless wings. The dream tugged at him, no longer gentle. He thought of the sheep grazing without him, of nights under stars that felt like old friends. He thought of the old man's eyes, bright with certainty. As the sun lowered, he made his choice that he sold his flock to a merchant who smiled too quickly. The sound of coins felt thin and final. With the weight of them in his pocket and the stones in his hand, the shepherd stood alone. The road he knew was gone. Ahead lay water and rumor. At the dock, a man with quick hands and a quicker tongue promised passage to a land across the sea, a place of white houses and sharp light. The shepherd listened, trusting the pull inside his chest. He handed over his coins. The man nodded and melted into the crowd, telling him to wait. The waiting stretched. Night cooled the air. The harbor lamps flickered like uncertain stars. The shepherd searched faces, dread crawling up his spine. He reached for the stones, then stopped. He did not want their answer. He already felt it. When dawn came, the man did not return. The shepherd sat on the dock, the sea whispering its indifference. His pockets were empty. The city he had trusted turned its back, busy with its own breathing. He felt foolish, stripped of everything but the clothes on his skin and a dream that now tasted of salt and loss. That he stood and walked until his legs ached, until the streets narrowed and the sounds thinned. At a shop where crystal caught the light and scattered it into trembling rainbows, he paused. The owner watched him from behind the glass, eyes wary, measuring. The shepherd raised his hand to knock, not knowing what he would ask for, only that he could not stand still any longer. The door gleamed, reflecting his face back at him, older than it had been the day before. Behind the glass, the shopkeeper did not move. Chapter 3, The City of White Walls and Shattered Trust. The sea carried him toward a shore that smelled of salt and old stories. The boat rocked as if it were breathing, and the boy held the rail while the world he knew loosened its grip. The land behind him had become a blur of hills and sheep bells, and ahead rose a city pale as bone, stacked in sharp lines beneath a burning sky. Its walls caught the light and threw it back without mercy. This place felt awake in a way that made his chest tighten. When his feet touched the ground, the earth felt strange, harder, less forgiving. Voices rushed around him like birds startled from a tree. The sounds twisted and curled, full of sharp edges and quick laughter. He understood none of it. The air was thick with smoke, spice, sweat, and something bitter that stung the nose. He clutched his bag and moved forward, guided by instinct rather than thought. The streets narrowed quickly. Stone pressed close on both sides, and shadows spilled across the ground like dark water. Men leaned in doorways, eyes bright and measuring. Children ran past, laughing, then vanished. The boy tried to walk with calm steps, remembering the words he had been given before leaving, words about signs and courage and listening to the quiet voice inside. Still, his heart beat fast. A young man approached with a smile that seemed friendly enough. His hands moved as he spoke, painting pictures in the air. Though the words meant nothing, the tone felt warm. The boy answered with gestures, showing hunger, pointing to his mouth. The young man nodded eagerly, took his arm, and guided him through a maze of streets. The city folded around them, turning and twisting until the sky became a narrow ribbon overhead. They stopped at a place where the smell of food was thick and heavy. Steam rose from metal pots. The boy's stomach tightened with longing. The young man spoke rapidly, then gestured for the boy to wait. He disappeared into the crowd. Time stretched. The sounds of the city pressed in. The boy shifted his weight and watched strangers pass. His fingers brushed his bag, and a cold feeling crept into his chest. The young man did not return. When the boy opened his bag, his breath caught. The weight was wrong. The space inside felt empty in a way that echoed. The noise of the city seemed to swell, then fade into a distant roar. His ears rang. The dream he had carried across the water slipped from his hands like sand. He ran through the streets, calling out in a voice that cracked, but the city did not answer. Faces turned away. Laughter burst and died. No one stopped till he found a low wall and sat, his back against the stone. The heat pressed down, and the sun carved sharp shapes from every edge. Tears came without permission. He felt foolish, small, and painfully far from the quiet fields of home. The words about destiny and hidden paths felt thin now, like stories told to children before sleep. As the light shifted, he noticed the stones in his pocket, smooth and cool despite the heat. He rolled them in his palm, feeling their weight. They did not speak, yet they were solid, real. He remembered the promise that the world would help when he moved toward what he was meant to find. The city, however, offered no comfort. It only watched. Hunger drove him to his feet. He wandered without direction, letting the crowd carry him. At the edge of a market, he stopped before a small shop filled with glass that caught the sun and shattered it into fragments. Cups and bowls and strange shapes stood in careful rows, glowing like trapped light. The man inside watched the street with tired eyes. Dust coated the shelves, and the door hung open as if forgotten. The boy stood there, drawn by the quiet. The man met his gaze, then looked away. The boy lingered, unsure why his feet would not move. At last, he stepped inside. The air smelled of age and old tea. The man said nothing, only gestured toward a chair. The boy sat, grateful for the shade. Time passed in silence. The man polished a piece of glass with slow, patient strokes. The boy watched, feeling his breath steady. The clamor of the street softened, as if the shop held its own small world apart from the rest. When the man finally spoke, his voice was rough but calm. The boy understood little, yet the tone carried kindness edged with sorrow. The man poured tea and pushed a cup toward him. The warmth spread through the boy's hands. He drank, and the bitterness settled his stomach. They sat together, strangers sharing quiet. The boy sensed a story in the man, heavy and unspoken, like a door long closed. When the boy stood to leave, the man stopped him with a raised hand. He pointed to the shelves, then to the street, then mimed selling. The boy understood. Work. A way to stay. A way to eat. The idea landed softly, yet it carried weight. Staying meant delaying the dream. Leaving meant facing the city again with empty pockets. He stepped back into the sunlight, the stones warm in his hand. The city waited, vast and indifferent. Behind him, the shop stood open, filled with fragile light. He felt the pull of two paths, each humming with unseen promise, and the air seemed to hold its breath as he turned back toward the door. Chapter 4: The Language Beneath Words. The boy stayed in the crystal shop longer than he had planned, as if the place had quietly wrapped its arms around him. The days passed like soft sand slipping through open fingers. Morning light always found him sweeping the front steps, lifting dust that smelled of old stone and sun. Inside, the crystals waited in their quiet rows, catching light and breaking it into gentle rainbows that slid across the walls. Each piece seemed to hold a memory of mountains, of deep earth, of time moving without hurry. At first, the boy worked with care but little joy. His heart was still far away, stretched between the hills where his sheep grazed and the far-off land of his dream. Yet as days turned into nights and nights into mornings, something in him began to change. He learned the rhythm of the shop. He learned when people liked to talk and when they preferred silence. He learned that some came to buy, while others came only to touch beauty for a moment before returning to their gray lives. The shopkeeper watched him closely. The old man spoke little, but his eyes followed every movement, every decision. Sometimes he smiled in a way that seemed both kind and sad, as if he were watching a younger version of himself walk paths he had once been too afraid to follow. One afternoon, when the sun pressed hard against the street and the air shimmered, the boy had an idea. He suggested placing a small table outside the shop and serving tea in crystal glasses. Travelers passing by would stop, curious to taste something sweet from a vessel that looked too delicate to hold heat. The shopkeeper frowned, his fingers tightening around his prayer beads. Change made him uneasy. The shop had always been as it was. Still, something in the boy's calm voice, in the certainty behind his eyes, made the old man nod. They bought a small stove and glasses that rang like bells when touched. The first travelers stopped only to look. Then one asked for tea. Then another. Soon, laughter and steam filled the doorway, and the sound of coins followed. The shop had never been so alive. That night, after the street grew quiet, the shopkeeper spoke. He told the boy of a dream he had once carried, a dream of traveling to a sacred city far across the sands. He had saved and worked and waited, but the dream stayed where it was, untouched. He feared that if he ever reached that place, he would have nothing left to live for. So he chose the comfort of imagining instead of the risk of going. The boy listened, feeling both sadness and understanding. He saw how a dream, when left untouched, could slowly turn into a cage. He felt a strange pull in his chest, a reminder of his own promise to follow the signs given to him. That night, sleep came lightly, filled with images of wind and stars. As time passed, the shop grew richer, and so did the boy. Coins gathered in his pouch, heavy and warm. He counted them once, then stopped. He knew there was enough now to buy sheep again, to return to the hills and live the life he once loved. The thought was comforting, like a familiar song. Yet it also felt small, as if it were a door he had already opened and closed. One morning, as he lifted a crystal piece toward the light, he felt a sudden stillness. It was as if the world paused to breathe. The street noise faded. The air grew thick with meaning. He understood then that the world spoke a language beyond words. The crystals spoke through light. The wind through touch. People through silence as much as speech. And somewhere beneath it all, his heart spoke in a voice he could no longer ignore. He realized that the same force that shaped mountains and guided stars was also shaping his path. It moved through desire, through fear, through chance meetings and quiet moments. It was not something to be argued with or escaped. It was something to be listened to. That evening, he told the shopkeeper he would leave soon. The old man did not look surprised. He nodded slowly, as if he had known this moment would come from the very first day. He gave the boy his blessing, though his eyes shone with a sadness that had learned to live beside hope. The boy packed his few things and stood at the doorway of the shop one last time. The crystals glimmered softly, like stars caught in stone. He felt grateful, deeply so, for the place that had taught him how to listen. At the edge of the town, the desert waited. Its vastness stretched beyond sight, pale and endless. Caravans gathered there like slow-moving creatures, preparing to cross a sea without water. Men wrapped in cloth spoke in low voices. Animals shifted their weight, sensing the long journey ahead. The boy joined them, his heart beating with both fear and excitement. He felt small before the desert, yet welcomed by it, as if it recognized him. As the caravan began to move, the town behind him faded into dust and memory. That night, beneath a sky crowded with stars, he sat by the fire and listened. The flames whispered stories of distant lands. The sand sighed beneath the wind. And in the quiet space between those sounds, the boy felt a presence, watchful and alive, guiding him forward into the unknown. Chapter 5. The Shop of Shimmering Silence. The city rose from the desert like a pale dream, its walls worn smooth by wind and waiting. Narrow streets twisted and folded into one another, carrying voices, scents of spice, and the soft echo of footsteps. Santiago wandered through them with sand still clinging to his shoes and a tightness in his chest that felt heavier than his pack ever had. The sea was behind him now, and with it the familiar rhythm of waves and sheep bells. Ahead stood only uncertainty, tall and quiet. He climbed a steep path that led away from the noise. At the top sat a small shop, its windows filled with glass that caught the light and bent it into gentle rainbows. Bowls, cups, and strange curved vessels stood in silence, layered in dust. The place looked forgotten, as if time had slowed here and decided to rest. Santiago paused. His body was tired, but his heart stirred when he saw the glass. Something about it reminded him of the way dreams shimmered before dawn, fragile yet bright. He stepped closer and knocked. The sound echoed strangely, thin and hollowed. A man appeared, older, with eyes that seemed to have watched the same street for a very long time. His beard was gray, his robe worn but clean. He looked at Santiago without surprise, as if he had been expecting him all along. Santiago asked for work, his words careful and humble. He offered to clean the glass, to polish away the dust. The merchant studied him, then turned back inside without a word. Santiago followed, unsure whether he had been invited or ignored. The air inside smelled of old stone and metal. Shelves leaned slightly, burdened by glass that reflected Santiago's face back at him in 100 distorted ways. He began cleaning without waiting for permission. His hands moved steadily, wiping, lifting, breathing life back into the silent objects. As the sun climbed, something strange happened. Light poured through the windows, caught the polished glass, and spilled out onto the street. Passers-by slowed. Some stopped. A few stepped inside, curiosity guiding their feet. The merchant watched from a corner, his expression unreadable. By the time shadows stretched long again, the shop felt different. Alive. Coins clinked softly as customers paid. The merchant finally spoke, his voice low and cautious. "You can stay," he said. Days passed, then more days, folding into a new rhythm. Santiago learned the language of the city through gestures, smiles, and shared silence. He learned the merchant's habits, the way he feared change more than hunger, the way his eyes drifted toward a hill where a grand holy place shone white in the distance. The merchant spoke of that place often, yet never went. Wanting, Santiago realized, could be a prison. Together they changed the shop in small ways. Santiago suggested placing the glass outside, letting the sun invite travelers in. The merchant resisted, then agreed. Business grew. Later, Santiago proposed serving tea in the crystal cups, a simple pleasure that turned passers-by into guests. Again, the merchant hesitated, then allowed it. With each change, the shop breathed easier. With each success, Santiago felt his own heart stretch toward the horizon. He listened to the whispers inside him, the ones that spoke of pyramids and treasure and a path written just for him. Yet at night, lying on a thin mat beneath the shop's roof, doubt crept in like cold. He had money now. Enough to return home. Enough to buy sheep again, to walk familiar hills and sleep under known stars. The thought wrapped around him like a warm cloak. Comfort whispered promises of safety, of an ending without risk. The merchant seemed to sense this struggle. One evening, as the city glowed with lantern light, he spoke of dreams abandoned. He told Santiago how he had once longed to travel, to stand in distant holy places, but how the dream had slowly turned into a story he told himself instead of a road he walked. "I fear that if I go," the merchant said, "the dream will end. And if it ends, I will have nothing left to live for." Santiago felt the weight of those words settle deep within him. He understood then that dreams were not meant to be kept like fragile glass on a dusty shelf. They were meant to be used, to be lifted, to be risked. Time moved on, quiet and steady. Santiago's purse grew heavier, but his restlessness grew faster. The desert called to him in his sleep. He dreamed of wind carving paths through stone, of signs written in silence. One morning, as he cleaned the last cup and set it in the sun, he knew he could not stay. The shop had given him shelter, taught him patience, shown him the danger of settling for comfort. It had been a stopping place, not an ending. He told the merchant he was leaving. The old man nodded, sadness and understanding mixing in his eyes. He wished Santiago well, offering blessings and warnings in equal measure. As Santiago stepped back onto the road, the city behind him hummed with life, but his heart beat in time with something older and deeper. Ahead lay the desert, vast and unknowable. And somewhere beyond it, something waited that knew his name. Chapter 6, The Caravan of Uncertain Paths. The caravan moved like a long, patient creature across the desert, its many legs sinking into the sand with steady rhythm. Camels groaned softly, men rapped their faces against the wind, and the horizon trembled with heat that made the world feel unreal, like a dream half remembered. Santiago rode in silence, swaying with the camel's motion, feeling the vastness of the land enter his bones. This desert was nothing like the green hills of his homeland or the crowded streets of the coastal city. It was alive in a different way. It breathed through the wind, whispered through the dunes, and watched through the endless sky. Santiago felt small, but not afraid. Instead, he felt as if he had stepped into a place that knew him, a place that had been waiting. The caravan leader was a tall man with eyes like dark stone. He spoke little, but when he did, everyone listened. He had warned them before they set out that the desert was restless. Tribes were fighting, and danger walked openly between oases. The caravan would move carefully, stopping only when necessary, trusting silence more than speed. At night, fires bloomed like stars fallen to the earth. The men gathered close, sharing food and stories, their voices low. Santiago listened more than he spoke. He learned that many of these men were not travelers by choice. Some fled old mistakes. Some chased wealth. Some simply followed the caravan because standing still felt worse than moving forward. Among them was an Englishman, pale and intense, always reading from thick books covered in strange symbols. His camel carried more paper than supplies. He barely looked up from his pages, except to glance at the horizon as if searching for something invisible. One night, as the fire crackled and the desert wind hummed, Santiago sat near him. The Englishman finally closed one of his books and sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I am looking for a man," he said suddenly, his voice sharp with urgency. "An alchemist." Santiago's heart stirred. The word felt familiar, like a bell ringing inside him. He asked what an alchemist was. "Someone who understood the hidden language of the world," the Englishman explained. "Someone who could turn metal into gold, yes, but more importantly, someone who could understand how all things were connected. Someone who had mastered the great work." Santiago listened, fascinated. He thought of the king, of the strange sense that the world had been guiding him, step by step. He asked the Englishman why he wanted to find such a man. "To learn," the Englishman replied simply. "I have studied books my whole life, but books are not enough. I must see with my own eyes." Santiago nodded. He understood that feeling deeply. He had left his sheep behind for the same reason. As the nights passed, Santiago began to sense patterns in the desert. He noticed how the wind shifted before sunrise, how the camels grew restless before storms, how silence sometimes felt heavy and other times gentle. He realized that the desert spoke, not in words, but in signs. The Englishman spoke often of theories, of hidden laws, of symbols written by ancient hands. Santiago spoke of dreams, of omens, of listening to the heart. At first, they seemed to speak different languages. But slowly, something strange happened. They began to understand each other. One evening, the caravan stopped earlier than expected. The leader ordered everyone to stay close and keep their fires low. His face was tense. That night, Santiago could not sleep. The desert felt alert, like an animal holding its breath. He closed his eyes and tried to listen, not with his ears, but with something deeper. Images rose in his mind, horses running, swords flashing, dust stained dark. His heart pounded, fear crept in, cold and sharp. But alongside it came clarity. The desert was warning him. At dawn, Santiago gathered his courage and approached the caravan leader. His voice shook as he spoke of the images he had seen, of the feeling that danger was near. The leader studied him for a long time, his gaze heavy. Finally, he nodded and gave orders. Scouts were sent ahead. The caravan changed course. Not long after, they found signs of battle. Broken weapons. Blood in the sand. The danger had been real. The men looked at Santiago with new eyes. Some with awe. Some with suspicion. The Englishman stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "You read the desert," he said quietly, Santiago did not feel proud. He felt humbled. The experience had shown him something important. The world was not outside him. It was within him, speaking through his instincts, his dreams, his fears. Days later, the caravan reached an oasis. Palm trees rose like miracles from the sand, their green crowns shimmering. Water reflected the sky, and birds filled the air with sound. Life exploded after so much emptiness. Santiago felt relief wash over him, but also unease. The oasis felt like a place where journeys paused, where people forgot why they were moving in the first place. As they settled among the palms, the caravan leader announced they would stay for a time. War made travel too dangerous. That night, as music drifted through the air and laughter returned, Santiago walked alone between the trees. He sensed that the oasis was not an ending, but a crossing point. Something important waited here. The desert had not finished speaking. And Santiago felt, deep in his chest, that his path was about to change again, in a way he could not yet see, but could already feel pulling him forward. Chapter 7: The Oasis That Breathed. The caravan reached the oasis like a secret revealed all at once. After endless days of sand and sky, the land suddenly softened. Palm trees rose like green flames, their shadows spilling over pools of clear water. The air changed its voice here. It was cooler, fuller, carrying the scent of leaves, earth, and animals resting. The desert, which had spoken only in heat and silence, now whispered with life. The boy felt it before he understood it. His heart slowed, as if it had been running for too long and had finally found a place to sit down. People poured into the oasis from every direction, men and women wrapped in fabric the color of sand and night. Camels knelt, groaning in relief. Children ran between tents. Fires were lit, and the sound of metal touching stone drifted through the air as meals were prepared. This place was neutral ground. Even in times of war, the desert honored the oasis. Weapons were wrapped and set aside. Old enemies drank from the same wells without speaking of blood or revenge. It was as if the palms themselves demanded peace. The boy wandered through the narrow paths between the trees, carrying his water skin. Everywhere he looked, there was movement. Hands drawing water, hands washing cloth, hands shaping bread. Life did not hesitate here. It flowed. As he reached one of the wells, he saw her. She stood with other women, waiting for her turn, her face half hidden by dark cloth. But when she lifted her eyes, the world shifted. It was not the beauty alone, though that was undeniable. It was the feeling that struck him, sudden and complete, like a bell rung inside his chest. He forgot the desert. He forgot his journey. He forgot even the dream that had pushed him across the sea and into the sand. She noticed him looking and did not turn away. Her eyes were calm, deep, and unafraid. When she smiled, it felt like something ancient had recognized him. He approached without planning to. Words came to him as if they had been waiting. "My name is Santiago," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "I am Fatima," she replied. The name settled into him like water into dry ground. They spoke simply. About the desert. About the oasis. About the caravan's journey. Yet beneath every word ran another language, one without sound. It was the language he had begun to hear more often, the one the old king had spoken of. The language of the world. In it, nothing was rushed, and nothing was wasted. When Fatima left, carrying her water, the boy felt both full and hollow. He stood by the well long after she was gone, as if the space she had occupied still held her shape. That night, beneath the palms, the boy lay awake. The oasis hummed with quiet life. Somewhere, a flute played. He placed a hand over his heart and felt it beating fast, then slower, as if unsure what rhythm to choose. He had found love. And love changed everything. The next day, as the caravan settled into a rhythm of waiting, the boy met the alchemist again. The man's presence was different here. Where others relaxed, he remained alert, his eyes scanning the horizon beyond the palms. The alchemist spoke of danger. Of signs in the wind. Of armies moving like storms. The oasis, peaceful as it was, stood in the path of something violent. That evening, as the sun lowered and painted the sand red, the boy climbed a small rise beyond the tents. He watched the desert breathe. And then he saw it. A vision struck him without warning. 2 hawks circled above, their wings sharp against the sky. Suddenly, one dove at the other, and in that motion, the scene changed. He saw armed men charging toward the oasis. He heard screams. He saw fire where water had been. The vision vanished as quickly as it had come. The hawks were gone. The sky was empty. The boy's heart pounded. He knew this feeling. This was not imagination. This was a message. He went to the leaders of the oasis, his voice shaking but firm. He spoke of what he had seen. Some laughed. Some frowned. But others listened. In the desert, signs were not dismissed lightly. When the alchemist heard what the boy had done, his eyes shone. You listened, he said. And you acted. The oasis prepared. Weapons were uncovered. Guards were placed. The palms watched silently. When the attack came, it came as the vision had promised. But the oasis was ready. The attackers were driven away, their surprise turning to fear. Blood stained the sand at the edges of the palms, but the heart of the oasis remained alive. The boy was brought before the leaders again. This time, there was no laughter. They rewarded him with gold and respect. But more than that, they gave him a choice. He could stay. He could live here, safe among water and shade. That night, he walked again to the well. Fatima was there, as if she had been waiting. He told her everything. About his dream. About the treasure. About the road that still stretched before him like an unanswered question. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she placed her hand on his. I am of the desert, she said. The desert takes our men and returns them changed. If you stay because of fear, your heart will never rest. If you go because of love, you will always return. The words were simple. But they carried the weight of truth. They embraced, and in that moment, the boy felt pain and strength woven together. Love did not ask him to abandon his path. It asked him to walk it fully. As he stepped away from the well, the alchemist watched from the shadows, his eyes following the boy toward the open desert beyond the palms, where the next lesson was already waiting. Chapter 8: The Voice That Lives Inside the Wind. The desert had begun to feel less like an enemy and more like a vast, listening presence. Its dunes rose and fell like frozen waves, and the wind moved across them with a sound like breathing. Santiago walked beside the alchemist, his horse stepping carefully, as if aware that every grain of sand mattered. The sun hung low, spreading copper light across the land, and the air shimmered with quiet intensity. They rode in silence for a long while. Santiago felt something changing inside him, a subtle tightening and opening at the same time. The journey had stripped him of many things, certainty, comfort, even fear, but in their place, something sharper had grown. He no longer felt like a boy following signs. He felt like someone being watched by the world itself. The alchemist finally spoke, his voice calm, almost gentle. He asked Santiago if he understood what it meant to listen to his heart. Santiago thought of the restless nights, the sudden joys, the warnings that came without words. He said that his heart spoke constantly, but often in confusion. Sometimes it was afraid of suffering. Sometimes it distracted him with dreams of comfort. Sometimes it tried to protect him by inventing reasons to stop. The alchemist nodded, as if hearing an old truth repeated. He said that a heart does not always speak clearly at first. It learns as the person learns. Fear of pain, he explained, is worse than pain itself. And no heart has ever suffered when it went in search of its dream, because every step is filled with meaning. They stopped near a cluster of dark stones where the wind carved soft curves into the sand. The alchemist dismounted and gestured for Santiago to do the same. He reached into his robe and took out a small glass vial filled with a clear liquid that caught the light like a living thing. That he told Santiago that this was the essence of life, something that could heal metals and men alike. He warned him that power was not meant to be used lightly. True alchemy, he said, was not about changing lead into gold, but about changing fear into understanding. Santiago felt a tremor pass through him. The words settled deep, like seeds planted in silence. They mounted their horses again and continued toward a distant shape rising from the horizon. As they drew closer, Santiago realized it was a military camp. Dark tents stood in rigid lines, and armed men moved like shadows between them. The air grew tense, heavy with suspicion. Before they reached the camp, the alchemist stopped. He turned to Santiago with a look that was both kind and unyielding. He said they would separate here. The word struck Santiago harder than the desert wind. He protested at once, saying he was not ready, that he still did not know enough. The alchemist listened patiently, then smiled. That he said that learning was not something that could be handed over. It had to be claimed. Santiago had already been taught everything he needed. What remained was courage. He told Santiago to go to the camp alone. If he truly understood the language of the world, he would be protected. If not, then his journey would end, but it would end in honesty. The alchemist turned his horse away before Santiago could speak again. Within moments, he was swallowed by the dunes, leaving behind only hoofprints that the wind quickly erased. Santiago stood there, his heart pounding. The desert felt immense, and for the first time in a long while, he was truly alone. He rode toward the camp as the sun dipped lower, his presence quickly noticed. Armed men surrounded him, their faces hard, eyes sharp with distrust. They demanded to know why he was there. Santiago spoke carefully. He said he was traveling, guided by dreams and signs. Laughter rippled through the group, but it died quickly when one man stepped forward, his presence commanding instant silence. His gaze was cold, calculating. This man, the leader of the camp, listened without expression. Then he asked Santiago what special power he possessed that allowed him to cross the desert alone. Before Santiago could think, words rose from somewhere deeper than thought. He said he could speak with the desert. He could listen to the wind. He could become one with the world around him. The camp fell into uneasy quiet. The leader's eyes narrowed. He said that such claims were dangerous. But he also said that the desert respected truth, and lies were punished quickly here. He gave Santiago a challenge. By the next sunset, Santiago would have to prove his words. He would have to turn himself into the wind. The sentence echoed in Santiago's mind long after he was led to a small tent at the edge of the camp. Alone, he sat on the sand, his hands trembling. He had spoken without thinking, and now the weight of it pressed down on him. He had no idea how to do what he had claimed. Fear surged through him, sharp and suffocating. His heart screamed that this was madness, that he had gone too far, that he would die because of foolish words. He closed his eyes and tried to listen, as he had been taught. At first, there was only panic. Then, slowly, he felt the desert's vastness, its patience. He felt the endless time written into every dune. He spoke aloud, his voice barely more than a whisper. He asked the desert how to become the wind. The desert answered not with words, but with a feeling. It reminded him that it had never changed itself. It had allowed the wind to shape it, had surrendered to something greater. Santiago felt a realization stir. He turned his attention to the wind, feeling its cool touch against his skin. He asked the wind for help. The wind laughed, playful and wild. It said it could move mountains of sand, carry storms across continents, but it could not change a human into itself. That power belonged to something higher. Santiago lifted his face to the sky. The sun hovered above, vast and burning. He felt its presence, ancient and watchful. He spoke to it with humility, asking how a human could become more than flesh. The sun's warmth wrapped around him. It told him that everything was born from the same source, that all things shared the same soul. Transformation was not about becoming something else, but about remembering what one truly was. As the day drew toward its end, the air around Santiago began to shift. The camp stirred with unease as the wind picked up, circling, growing stronger. Sand lifted into the air, swirling like living smoke. Santiago stood at the center, his eyes closed, his heart wide open. He felt himself dissolving into the rhythm of the world, his fear melting into awe. The wind roared louder, the sky darkened, and the desert seemed to rise in a single breath. And just as the first stars began to emerge, the storm reached its peak, swallowing everything in motion and sound. No one in the camp could see Santiago anymore, and in that roaring, blinding moment, the leader of the camp began to wonder whether the boy had vanished forever, or whether the desert itself was about to reveal a secret it had guarded since the beginning. Chapter 9, Where the Wind Learns Your Name. The oasis breathed like a living creature. Palm leaves whispered above pools that caught the sky and broke it into shining pieces. Camels knelt and rose like tired mountains learning to move again. Water ran in narrow paths between tents, carrying reflections of faces that had traveled far to arrive here and did not yet know how long they would stay. The boy walked slowly, as if afraid that a sudden step might wake the place and make it vanish. He had learned that deserts could play tricks on the eyes and the heart. Yet this was no mirage. This was a true shelter, wide and generous, filled with voices and smoke and the smell of bread. It was a pause in the great breath of sand, a place where time loosened its grip. He carried news with him, heavy as a stone in his chest. The desert had spoken, and he had listened. Now the message burned behind his eyes, asking to be shared. War was moving like a shadow toward the oasis. The tribes would come with steel and anger. The oasis believed itself protected by ancient rules, but the boy had seen what was coming, clear as water in the sun. He found the elders seated in a circle, their robes pale and their eyes sharp. They listened without interruption as he spoke of the vision, of riders and flags and blood-dark sand. Some frowned. Some smiled as if indulging a child. When he finished, silence settled like dust. At last one elder spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of many seasons. He said the desert gives many dreams, and not all are true. Another said that the boy had no reason to lie, and courage was needed to hear such warnings. They argued gently, like men who had learned patience from watching palms grow. When they reached a decision, they thanked the boy and told him the oasis would prepare. If nothing came, no harm would be done. If danger arrived, many lives might be saved. The boy bowed, relief washing through him, followed by a strange emptiness. He had done what he came to do, but he did not feel finished. The desert still watched him. The wind still waited. As he turned away, a man stepped from the shade of a tent. He wore black, a color that drank the light. His eyes were bright and unreadable, like polished stone. He carried no visible weapon, yet his presence felt sharp. He spoke the boy's name, though the boy did not remember telling it to anyone. They walked together along the edge of the oasis, where green gave way to gold. The man asked about the boy's journey, about sheep and kings and glass and dreams. He listened as if each word were a clue in a puzzle only he could see. When the boy finished, the man nodded, as if satisfied that he said he was an alchemist. The word fell between them like a spark. The boy had heard it before, spoken with curiosity and doubt. He asked about turning metal into gold, about secrets and symbols. The man smiled faintly and said gold was the least of it. True alchemy was about listening to the world, about understanding the language that runs beneath all others. They stopped where the desert stretched unbroken to the horizon. The man lifted his hand, and the wind rose as if summoned. Sand danced around them, not harsh but playful, like a child circling its parent. The boy felt his heart race. He sensed something vast and patient moving through the air. Recognizing him, the alchemist said the boy had learned much, but fear still lived in him. Fear of loss. Fear of love. Fear of arriving at the end and finding nothing there. The boy wanted to argue, but the word struck true. He thought of the girl at the well, her dark eyes reflecting palm leaves and sky. He thought of the way his chest tightened when he imagined leaving her. They walked back into the oasis, and the boy found her near the water, filling a jar. The light touched her hair and turned it into a river of shadow. When she saw him, she smiled, and the world narrowed to that single curve of her lips. They spoke quietly, as if the air itself were listening. He told her of his journey, of the treasure that called to him from beyond the desert. He told her that his heart was torn between staying and going. She listened without turning away, her gaze steady. She said love does not chain. Love allows. She said the desert understands this, that women of the desert learn early how to wait without despair. She placed her hand over his, and he felt a warmth deeper than the sun. She told him to go and return, changed but true. Her words lifted a weight from him, yet they also opened a wound. Leaving would hurt. Staying would hurt. He realized then that pain was not an enemy, but a sign that he was alive and moving. The alchemist watched from a distance. Later, he spoke to the boy again and said the oasis was not his place of rest. It was a place of choice. The boy would leave soon, guided by signs that would test him beyond comfort. That night, the desert did not sleep. The wind carried distant sounds, metal striking metal, voices raised in anger. Before dawn, the tribes came. The oasis woke to chaos. Riders surged like a dark tide, and the air filled with cries and dust. The elders' preparations saved many lives. The attackers were driven back, surprised by resistance where they expected peace. When the sun climbed, the sand was marked with the memory of violence, and the oasis stood, shaken but alive. The boy stood beside the alchemist, watching the aftermath. He felt both small and powerful, a single thread woven into a vast design. The alchemist said this was a lesson, that listening had value, that courage could change the shape of fate. Then he told the boy to prepare to leave at dawn. The desert stretched before them, vast and silent, holding secrets deeper than fear. As the night closed in, the boy felt the pull of the unknown titan, and he wondered what the wind would ask of him next. Chapter 10. The Alchemist's Lesson. Santiago had traveled far across the desert, the sun blazing over endless waves of golden sand. His feet were sore, his throat dry, but his heart beat with the excitement of discovery. He had learned to read the omens, to trust the signs the world offered him, and yet he knew there was still so much he did not understand. The treasure he sought felt closer, but the journey had become more mysterious, more perilous. One afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of distant oasis flowers, Santiago met the alchemist. The man appeared as if out of the sand itself, his robes flowing like the desert wind, his eyes glimmering with knowledge that seemed older than time. Santiago bowed respectfully, sensing that the next stage of his journey would demand courage he had never known. You have come far, the alchemist said, his voice calm but resonant, like the echo of a deep cave. But now, you must learn the greatest lesson of all. The treasure you seek is not simply gold. It is understanding. It is transformation. Santiago looked around, seeing only sand, sky, and a few scattered rocks, yet he felt the alchemist's words stirring something deep inside him. But I have followed the omens, I have risked everything, he said. How can I transform? I am just a shepherd. The alchemist smiled. To find the treasure, you must learn to turn lead into gold. Not with your hands, but with your soul. You must listen to the world, feel its pulse, and become part of it. Only then will the desert reveal its secrets. They set off together, walking through the shifting dunes, the wind singing in Santiago's ears. The alchemist spoke little, yet Santiago felt as if he were absorbing wisdom from every glance, every gesture. At sunset, they reached a small, hidden valley, where the sand gave way to rocky cliffs and a narrow stream trickled with clear water. The alchemist stopped and crouched near a patch of green, picking up a handful of sand. Look closely, he said, letting the grain slip through his fingers. The universe is alive. Every grain has a purpose, a place. And so do you. To achieve your personal legend, you must understand this truth. The universe conspires to help those who truly seek their treasure, but it also demands that you face fear and doubt. Santiago bent down to study the sand, seeing patterns he had never noticed before. Shapes twisted and shifted as if alive, and he felt a connection to everything around him, the sky, the rocks, the wind. It was a strange, thrilling sense, like seeing the threads that connected all things, a language that the soul of the world spoke silently. That is why fear is the greatest obstacle, the alchemist continued. When you are afraid, you break the connection. When you doubt, the universe cannot guide you. You must trust, Santiago. Trust in yourself, and trust in the world. Night fell, and the desert became a deep, star-filled silence. The alchemist built a small fire, its flames flickering like living spirits. Santiago watched, feeling a strange heat in his chest, a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He realized that the real treasure was not only the gold he imagined in his dreams, but the courage to face the unknown, the wisdom to read the signs, and the ability to act despite fear. The alchemist poured a small amount of liquid from a vial into Santiago's hands. It shimmered like liquid sunlight. "Drink," he said. "This will help you see the path clearly. But remember, seeing is not enough. You must act. The desert tests not the clever, but the brave." Santiago drank, and a warmth spread through him, filling every part of his body. Colors became sharper, sounds clearer, and he felt the pulse of life in the desert as if it beat in his own chest. He saw how the dunes shifted like living creatures, how the stars above seemed to guide him, and how the tiniest movements, the flight of a bird, the ripple of sand, carried messages. When he looked up, the alchemist was gone. For a moment, panic surged in Santiago's chest, but then he heard the man's voice in his mind, calm and guiding, "Go where the desert leads, and you will find what you seek. But remember, the greatest danger is not in the journey itself, it is in failing to trust yourself." Santiago took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the desert and the promise of treasure ahead. The night was alive with possibility, and the stars seemed to whisper secrets. He understood that he was no longer the boy who had left his flock behind, he was a seeker, a traveler who had begun to speak the language of the world. But as he set off toward the horizon, the desert stirred with movement. Shadows shifted at the edge of the dunes, and Santiago sensed that eyes were watching him. The wind carried whispers, warning or invitation, he could not tell. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation, for he knew that the next steps would test him in ways he could not yet imagine, and in that moment, Santiago realized that the desert secrets were not yet fully revealed, and that the alchemist's greatest lesson was still waiting, hidden among the sands, ready to challenge him beyond his understanding. Chapter 11. The Soul of the World. Santiago and the alchemist walked through the desert, the sun climbing higher and warmer with every step. The sand stretched endlessly, a golden sea, whispering secrets in the wind. Santiago felt the pulse of life in everything around him, the way the sun kissed the dunes, the way the grains shifted beneath his feet, and the distant calls of unseen creatures. He began to understand that the desert was alive, not just a place to cross, but a teacher speaking in a language of symbols and feelings. The alchemist moved with calm certainty, his robes flowing, his eyes bright with quiet fire. He seemed in harmony with the desert, as though the wind bent around him, and the sun did not burn him. "Do you feel it, Santiago?" the alchemist asked, his voice almost blending with the breeze. "Do you feel the life that is everywhere?" Santiago nodded, though he was not entirely sure what he was feeling. It was more than wind or sun, it was the heartbeat of the world itself, a rhythm that seemed to call him forward. He could feel his own heartbeat syncing with it, a strange echo of something vast and eternal. They set up camp under a cluster of rocks, where the shadow fell long and cool. Santiago studied the alchemist, wondering how a man could be so certain of the world's magic. "How do you know these things?" he asked. "How do you know where the soul of the world leads?" The alchemist smiled, his gaze distant, yet piercing. "Because I have listened," he said. "Because I have watched. Because I have risked everything to understand the language of the world." That night, Santiago watched the fire crackle, sparks rising to mingle with the stars. He thought of the treasure he sought, the green fields and gold that had drawn him from his small town. But he also thought of the journey, the danger, the vast desert, the alchemist's strange and powerful presence. He realized that the world had a way of testing those who dared to follow their dreams, shaping them in silence, bending them without breaking them. The next morning, the alchemist took Santiago to a hidden oasis, a place where palm trees gathered like guardians, and water shimmered like liquid glass. There, a caravan was resting, travelers moving with cautious energy. Santiago could feel the tension in the air. The desert could be both generous and cruel. The alchemist's eyes seemed to pierce through the crowd, noting the strength and fear in each person. "You must learn to transform yourself," the alchemist said, speaking more to the wind than to Santiago. "The desert tests you, yes, but it also shows you who you are. To find the treasure, you must become the treasure. You must learn the language of the world, and let it flow through you." Santiago struggled to understand. How could he, a simple shepherd, transform into something so vast and vital? The alchemist handed him a small, clear vial filled with liquid that shimmered like sunlight trapped in glass. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Drink, and you will see what it means to understand the soul of the world." As Santiago lifted the vial, a strange warmth spread through his body, like a gentle fire, igniting thoughts and feelings he could not name. The desert around him seemed to hum, the air thick with possibility. He felt connected to everything, the wind, the sand, the distant mountains, and for a moment, he understood that the journey was no longer about the gold. It was about learning to read the signs, to listen to the heartbeat beneath the world, and to let it guide him. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in molten shades, the alchemist stood by the edge of the oasis and stared into the horizon. "Tomorrow, you will face a choice," he said, his voice steady and solemn. "A choice that will determine if you are ready to grasp the treasure you seek. The desert has tested you, but the greatest test is yet to come." Santiago felt a shiver of anticipation and fear. The journey had taught him patience, courage, and wonder, but he knew this test would demand more than he had ever imagined. The desert whispered around him, as though aware of what lay ahead, and the stars blinked in quiet warning that he slept under the open sky. The fire reduced to glowing embers, and dreamt of treasures hidden deep within the earth, of a wind that carried secrets from one end of the world to the other, and of a voice that promised both danger and glory. When dawn broke, the alchemist beckoned him forward. The desert stretched endlessly, golden and silent, waiting for them. Santiago's heart pounded. He understood, finally, that the path to the treasure was not measured in distance, but in courage, wisdom, and the willingness to become part of the world itself. But as they stepped into the shifting sands, a shadow moved at the edge of his vision, something or someone watching, waiting. And in that instant, Santiago realized that the desert held secrets beyond his understanding, and that the real test of his journey was only just beginning. Chapter 12, The Treasure Within. Santiago stood at the edge of the desert, the sun rising like molten gold over endless dunes. The wind carried the scent of earth and water, a promise of something waiting just beyond the horizon. He could feel the pulse of the world beneath his feet, the rhythm of life in every grain of sand, in every whisper of the wind. The journey had brought him farther than he had ever imagined, through fear, hope, love, and doubt. And now, he sensed that the moment he had dreamed of was near. He remembered the lessons of the alchemist, the need to trust the world, to read the signs, to transform himself, to face fear and uncertainty. He remembered the oasis, the flames, the vial of sunlight like liquid, and the words that had echoed in his mind: "The universe conspires to help those who truly seek their treasure." Santiago understood now that the treasure had never been only gold, it had been the journey itself, and the courage, wisdom, and love that had grown within him along the way. Yet the treasure he sought was real, tangible, hidden in a place he had never guessed. Following the signs, he approached a quiet village nestled among gentle hills, where the old church tower rose like a sentinel over weathered stones. His heart raced with anticipation. Every step seemed guided by some invisible hand, and every detail of the world spoke to him in the language he had learned to understand. Santiago dug at the base of a tree in the churchyard, the very place he had dreamed of long ago. The earth was soft, as if waiting for him, and the shovel met little resistance. Hours passed, and sweat and dust covered him, but he continued, driven by a force he could not name. And then, thunk! His hands trembled as he struck something solid beneath the soil. Carefully, he cleared the dirt, revealing a wooden chest, old and weathered, its lock rusty but intact. With trembling hands, Santiago opened it. Inside lay gold coins, shining with a brilliance that made his eyes ache. He reached in, feeling the weight of them, the reality of his long-sought dream. Yet as he held the treasure, he felt a deeper sense of joy and clarity than any gold could provide. He understood now that the real reward had been the journey, the courage to leave home, the willingness to risk everything, the ability to read the omens, and the strength to transform himself along the way. That he thought of the alchemist, of the quiet desert nights and the lessons of patience, trust, and love. He realized that the treasure had always been within him, waiting to be unlocked by experience and understanding. The gold was merely a symbol, a reflection of the inner riches he had cultivated, the wisdom, the courage, and the connection to the soul of the world. Santiago smiled, feeling a warmth that spread through him, brighter than the desert sun. He knew that his journey was not over. The world was vast, full of mysteries yet to uncover, paths yet to walk, and wonders yet to see. But he also knew that he would never again fear the unknown, for he had learned the language of the world and had become part of its eternal rhythm. As he stood there, the wind whispered around him, carrying distant voices, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of water, and the quiet laughter of the world. Santiago felt a sense of unity, as if every step he had taken, every choice he had made, every fear he had faced, had led him to this perfect moment of understanding. He was a shepherd who had dreamed, a traveler who had risked, and a seeker who had found not just gold, but himself. And yet, even as he held the treasure, Santiago sensed that life would continue to challenge him, to teach him, to call him forward. The desert had more lessons, the world more secrets, and the soul of the world more wonders than he could ever imagine. But for now, he stood in quiet triumph, at the center of his journey, knowing that the real magic had always been the courage to follow his dream. With the chest of gold at his feet and the desert stretching endlessly behind him, Santiago took a deep breath and smiled. The treasure was real, the journey had been true, and the world, with all its signs and wonders, was alive and waiting. And somewhere in the wind, he thought he could hear the alchemist's quiet voice, smiling and saying, "You have found more than gold, Santiago. You have found yourself." The sun rose higher, golden and unstoppable, and Santiago, the shepherd who had dared to dream, began the next chapter of his life, carrying not only treasure, but the knowledge that every heart has its own personal legend, and every soul can hear the language of the world if only it dares to listen. If you enjoyed this story, tell me, what book should we dive into next on Momentum Mind? Comment your favorite below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode that could change the way you think, feel, and act.